All right, who wants to break the ice? Specific questions, specific clarifications. Ready? Go.
Can you go over electric sequence again?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a beautiful artwork. So there's a very specific reason why I use that verb. Plyometrics, plural, just as we kind of use it in typical. The plural form can mean a lot of things, like if you're doing 10 repetitions of a box jump, each jump is a plyometric sequence, so the sum total of several could be plyometrics in general. So the reason I use plyometric sequence is to remind you that we only have 3 contractions: iso, con, eccentric. However, because of tension, because of well, Brian, let me start over. One of the components of tension, pull force, is that things that pull can only be lengthened while pulling, followed by shortening while pulling, because they can't push. So in other words, a rubber band can only be stretched, followed by shortened. Because once it shortens on its own, it can't lengthen itself. It's done. The example that I give in class with the cart is if I had a rope or a TheraBand and I was pulling, let's say I communicated I'm a chalkboard puller. I'm pulling in the direction of the chalkboard. Once I pull and have concentric contraction, I'm done. I can't push it. Something else has to pull, maybe to slow it down and speed up. So the only 2 things that a muscle can do back to back is eccentric, being lengthened while still trying to shorten, changing direction, and then shortening. But once it starts to shorten, it can't stop it on its own. It could let off and let something else stop it, like gravity or its antagonist pull, right? So the plyometric sequence is specifically eccentric contraction, being lengthened, basically putting on the brake, continuing to recruit to pull beyond rest so that you could change the direction and put on the gas. Now, the plyometric sequence is also important to identify because that's where most damage comes from microscopically, delayed onset, and macroscopically, tears and strains and pulls and ruptures. It's when that muscle's changing direction, putting on the brake. It's when the rope. So applying that question, if we were, let's say, if we were going to verbalize it, so everybody take a second to external force, agonist, advertisement. Specifically, so what's our agonist here? Our knee extensors. What's that? Our knee extensors. Vastus medialis, lateralis, intermedius, rectus femoris. You should be able to say, where would the plyometric sequence be in the center side? In other words, where the muscle would kind of change my direction. And that's when you're at your most flexed position. Your extensors have to slow down that flexion piece of it, change your direction, and speed up your extension constantly. The top, gravity can do that. Gravity, you let off at the top to let the weight stack slow down your extension and speed up the flexion. But unless you let the place to plane, we're not planners, your muscles have to change your direction down. Does that make sense? So that's important to know, because that's in where most problems is gonna happen, where most pain is gonna happen. That's where your muscles, there's this not correct thought process that your muscles are working the same direction as motion. That's not true. Your muscles are working harder when they change your directions, and they can let off. Like in other words, you're not gonna extend with all your force, right? You're gonna let off and you can, and like grab this slow you down, like grab this you up. But at the bottom, you gotta work harder, to change your direction. So if your muscles are working harder, that means that you know that one. It's also one reason why for the exercises we use these machine concepts slow over control, because if you can work it slow and control, that means you're spending more time with those muscles working at the same level as opposed to. But that's what plyometric sequence is. It's a specific sequence of contraction, eccentric followed by concentric, because that's the only way muscles can do back to back. They can't shorten and then lengthen themselves. They have to lengthen. Something has to lengthen. That could be an antagonist, like my elbow extensors can lengthen my elbow flexors. Gravity can lengthen my elbow flexors, but my elbow flexors do not lengthen my elbow flexors. Good first question. Broke the ice. What else we got? The which one? I guess. Well. The weird one? Which? I thought you said the hips don't lie machine. I'm like, oh, I gotta check that one out. Brand new little monkey, the Shakira hips don't lie machine. Did you get a chance to check out the one? They have one in our weight room here. I'll try to find it before and after. This is the one I showed you. Kinesiology detectives. Look at the plates. And at the end of the day, that's what you're working against. The machine just uses pulleys to redirect forces. So in other words, the machine acting on him is transverse, but because of all the different redirection of the pulleys, the weight stack is still going up against gravity. So based off of the plates, I know that his start position when he got into the machine is the picture on the right. That makes sense? Because you're going to get into every machine with all the plates touch it. Now, this machine especially, you can reposition. See that little lever with the yellow handle on it? You can choose whether you want to start off with your trunk twisted to the right, twisted to the left, or not twisted at all. You get to position how you want to start. This person decided he wants to start off with his trunk twisted. How is his trunk? This is us practicing. How is his trunk twisted when he starts on the right? Is his trunk twisted to his right or to his left? Is his sternum looking at his left hip or his right hip? Good. Does that make sense? Now that's a big clue. It's a huge clue. The reason it's such a big clue is when you get into any machine, you're not going to start think of it like this, guys. You're not going to start a curl machine that's working your biceps in a flexed position. I guess there's some exercises you could start with the first motion being here. But if you get into the machine and the machine's not trying to move you, like in other words, if I get off of the squat rack, my first movement is eccentric, but also gravity's trying to move me. The machine isn't trying to move him in that initial position. So if he's twisted to the left, it kind of makes logical sense that his first movement isn't going to be to the left. That should be kind of some common sense, right? If his first initial movement isn't to resist anything, how in the world are you going to be twisted to your left and your first initial movement is twisting more to your left? That's a big clue. If he's twisted to the left, doesn't it make sense he needs muscles that are going to make him twist to the right? It's just one way to look at it. The other way is, all right, he's twisted to the left. Then when he moves the machine, he goes back to anatomical position. So he had to make right transverse trunk rotation happen concentrically. Right transverse trunk rotation. Another way to look at it is, yeah, the machine's not trying to twist him to the left here, but once he starts moving, the machine is trying to twist him to the left. So therefore, I don't need left transverse trunk rotators. Therefore, I need right transverse trunk rotators. And your circles or your lists just help us to identify who those pullers are. Left external, right internal, right erectors. So there's a lot of different ways that might work for different people to see what I'm trying to see. And that is, as kinesiology graduates, we have to be beyond the core. Because the core can be anything. And as therapists and practitioners and strength coaches, athletic trainers, we have to be able to know, am I using a left? Am I using a left? A whole little oblique, which ones? They don't all pull the same. So we have to have techniques to figure this kind of stuff out. Because what if you have one of these machines in your office and you're progressing and they're up to a point where they need to do some different kind of exercises, and you know that you're trying to target one of the obliques. How do you know where to set? How do you know where to set the machine? If you're trying to get right external, and you know that the right external is a left transverse trunk rotation puller, I wouldn't set the machine. I'd be to reposition it to set it to the other side. That's what we're working towards. Analytical knowledge, practical knowledge. Cool. So what would I started using start and finish. I started using start and finish. So in other words, if I wanted you to go from left to right, I would put start and then finish. And one of the first things I try to say in class is, guys, we may use this example in class. And the analogy is, I might say 2 + 2 is equal to 4. So we have a problem and we look for the number and we solve the problem. But on the test, I might say, what's 2 + 3 or 2 - 1. I might start finish, or I might literally crop and reposition the photos. So that way it's not Pavlov, ring the bell, salivate. I really want my students to be able to analytically figure it out. But I would communicate start and finish, absolutely. And again, it's without the context of those weight stacks. But once we can look at it and think, well, that kind of makes sense. Anytime you go into a machine, you're going to start with all the plates touching. That has to be the start. And then you're going to make the plates move apart. So that has to be a finish. but great question. Start, finish. That's how I communicate. Unless I do, but it doesn't change the analytics, but what if I just cropped the photo on the left? And I could just say, holding this isometrically, right? I could do that. It's the same muscles. Probably an easier question because you wouldn't have to do motion and contraction. But there's a lot of different ways I can ask math questions, but it doesn't change the fact that it's math, right? Good stuff. There's some students that struggle with seeing how this isn't a hip like question, right? I'm like, guys, the hip joints are just going along for the ride. Like there's for his hips to have internal and external rotation, you couldn't even have it because those little pads are preventing for him to internally and externally rotate his hips. He would have to do stuff like this. They're just going along for the ride as the pelvis and the trunk move. Feet are off the ground. And I did that in 310. Feet are off the ground. So you're using your trunk muscles. Remember, pelvic girdle rotations help us to see things, but we don't have you don't have a pelvic girdle rotation circle because they could be hip muscles, could be trunk muscles, could be both. So even though we can talk about pelvic girdle rotation, we still have to bring it back to what spun the basketball. Pelvic girdle rotation is like spinning a basketball, but the basketball can't spin itself. Something has to spin it. And when it's underneath the basketball, we say it's either the right hand, the left hand, or both hands. And when it's on top of the basketball, it's like palming it. That's the trunk. So in this case, the trunk is rotating the pelvis. And we could say, look, from left to right, right transverse pelvic. From right to left, left transverse pelvic. But we also had trunk motion. And when we go to muscles, we have to bring it back to trunk or hips because those are the same muscles all the time when we're used. Make sense? Right. Doing great. What do you feel, just getting some class feedback while you think of your next question, what joints are you feeling most confident about? Ask my 310 this question about, like if you had a scale of this is the most confusing and this is the least confusing, or this is what I'm most comfortable with, this is what I'm least comfortable with. Ankle, subtalar, knee, hip, trunk. Where is your scale at? What do you feel the most confident and where do you feel the least confident?
I'll say probably the easiest is
Trunk.
then knee, then probably just because we went over ankle last, I'll do hip.
Gotcha. And you're right. And I think the trade-off of that, I think I mentioned before, the hip just has so much stuff, right? So I was trying to get that one out so they go through sooner. And then the ankle is a little less complex. So I was trying to save that one for last. But no, good insight. Good insight. And what I think is good about the trunk is we only have one of it. We have a right side and left side. But then when you get into the extremities, right, we just have to remember I have a right hip and a left hip. They're mirrors of each other, but it's the same muscles on each side. That would be some weird stuff if our right side had entirely different structures than our left, but it's not. So it's okay to just learn we only had one of these, we only have one of these. We have two of these, two of these, two of those, but it's okay to keep all of the circulature similar because the same muscles on this side are the muscles inside. So if I need inverters, those are medial muscles. They're the medial muscles on the other side. But it would be a lot harder if you tried to memorize two mirrored circles. Like that would be tough. So I could do left-sided stuff. You identify the agonist, and you say, okay, I need my knee extensors on my left, but it's going to be the same ones on the right. So you don't have to be redundant there. Good insight. Does anybody have a different opinion in terms of what the hardest, the hip is, just because there's so much stuff? I'd say most of your I haven't written it yet, but most of your questions are going to be straight up function questions. What does this muscle do? Meaning, how does it pull? How does this muscle pull? How does that muscle pull? That's the bread and butter. All right.
I guess this is a specific question on stretching one.
Yeah.
If you say had an extended knee and an extended hip, obviously the sartorius is maximally stretched. But if there is something else that's also being stretched, but maybe it's being limited by sartorius,
Yeah.
would I want to choose the sartorius over another thing that's being stretched in that?
I wouldn't. What a great question. I would not give you two right answers. I would not give you two right answers. So I would specifically, my answer choices would be so that there's no ambiguity there, right? So I wouldn't give you a sartorius and an iliopsoas. I'd give you sartorius and a rectus. So that way the knee position is consistent for both of them, right? That's how I would do it. Good clarification question. But another, guys, sometimes I can't, because all of the answer choices are at random. And so I'm warning you, if I ask you the function of a rectus, and the first answer choice says knee extensor, read all the answer choices, because the third answer choice might say knee extensor and hip flexor. So it's not that the first one isn't half correct, it's not all correct. And that's what I'm assessing you on. I'm assessing to see if you remember that specific muscles can have function at multiple joints. So just please read all the choices. Again, what I like to do, I'm not telling you how to cook your gumbo. I just want your gumbo to not have tomatoes in it. Write it down. What's the function of the rectus femoris? Go to your circles, go to your list. I'm going to let you guys start writing 5 minutes before you test. I'm going to kick 310 out of here, and I'm going to have multiple sheets of paper stapled ready for you. If you want to get started writing early, come on down. But answer the question before you go to the answer choices. What's the function of the rectus femoris? And what does the rectus femoris do? It's a knee flexor and it's a knee extensor. And then go to your answer choices and see what agrees with what you already know. Okay? To me, that's the best way to not get confused. Because, you know, sometimes those answer choices, concentric, it does get confusing. So every one of these questions can be answered, fill in the blank. And then you can go to the answer choice that you're comfortable or confident in, and then see which one matches. Good stuff, guys. This is good clarifications. Are we feeling like, you know, sometimes you don't, every day that you're alive, if you look back at the day before, you would not realize that you grew or changed. In other words, one 24-hour period isn't enough to see change. When we were a baby, the day we were born and the next day, probably nothing significant. But over the course of long periods of time, we see changes, right? Here's a picture of me from a year ago, 3 years ago. I'm hoping that we can look at the snapshot, the picture of us understanding contractions very similarly. I'm hoping we can look back and say, wow, when Campbell introduced me to contractions, practically speaking, I know you've heard those words before in some beginner KNES class, but think about how far you've come to be able to apply muscles, influence motion through contraction. And I think that's something, you know, to be proud of. It's definitely something to show growth and understanding of this stuff. When do muscles get mostly damaged in concentric, eccentric, or isometric? Eccentric, absolutely. Delayed onset muscle soreness, injuries. So for us to identify when these eccentric phases are happening in certain things, it's extra important stuff. You strain a hip flexor. The irony is you aren't flexing when you strained it. You were slowing down extension. You feel it when you flex. That's just how it pulls. But the irony is that damage happens when the motion isn't in the same direction as the muscle. Why is a hip flexor called a hip flexor? Because it pulls that way, not because it always causes motion. And again, I'm just going to sound like a broken record until you skip past this part. But one of the strategies I'm trying to do as the unique way I teach is knowing that all these different muscles have different origins of their names. Some have origin in insertion, sternocleidomastoid. Some have Latin origins, soleus, gastrocnemius, and some have direction of pulling their name. I wish they all had direction. Adductor longus, adductor magnus. So because we have a vast array of non-consistent namings, the best thing we could do is make consistent how they pull. Because how they pull has meaning. The iliopsoas, the hip flexor, is a hip flexor, meaning that it pulls in the direction of hip flexion, whether it's working isometrically, pulls in the direction of hip flexion. Whether it's working concentrically, pulls in the direction of hip flexion. Whether it's working eccentrically, pulls in the direction of hip flexion. Whether you're sleeping, pulls in the direction of hip flexion. It always pulls that way. The motions may change. That's why we don't want to look at it in terms of motion. Its contraction may change, but its pull doesn't.
A visible login now, and I'm looking for the iliopsoas, so it had them separated as the
Iliacus, and
Yeah.
psoas major and minor. Yeah. And so the iliopsoas is just, and because they have the same function and they blend into the same, it's almost like some people will call the two heads of the gastroc and the psoas the triceps surae, because distally they blend into the same throat. George he said knowing the psoas major, minor, and iliacus is 100% a grad school thing. But his point was in undergraduate, you already have so many new muscles to learn. So it's just because functionally they're pulling on that lesser trochanter together. Let's just call it the iliopsoas. It's a combination of iliac. If you go back through the hip lecture, I explained that. But for the sake of not overwhelming, because there's still some muscles I left out, but all of the muscles, at least that I'm holding you accountable for, are you can call them prime movement core points, right? Like there's a muscle in the lower leg called the plantaris, which is a really weak, feeble plantar flexor. Some people think it's there more for proprioceptive stuff, like think of it like you have some people who go out to fight the fires and do more of the physical stuff, but you also need people inside the processing room to process the phone calls and to give insight on, right? But that's just an example that, you know, there's still more. And whether or not you're in grad school and you learn about scalenes and the cervical or quadratus lumborum in the trunk, what I'm hoping is that I teach you this process so you're like, oh, cool, I just get to add a new muscle in my circle. How does it pull? Oh, it's a left lateral, that means it's going to do this. Oh, left lateral only, that means it's going to sit the fence. So, you know, as kind of some of these newer muscles come up in grad school, concepts are still the same.
only 3 planes.
Was that?
I said there's only 3 planes.
That's it. That's it. There's only, but what's really elegant about that is, have you ever seen the the colors on a movie or a TV, every color, every shade of color is some combination of like red, blue, and green, right, or yellow, right? The three basic colors that you could color. And so it's very similar, like you have three main planes, but you can have infinite combinations of all sagittal, all frontal, 99.99% frontal, 0.01% sagittal, 99, like, so that's the part that's, there's only two knobs on an Etch-a-Sketch, but with those two basic knobs, I can create intricate artwork. Good stuff. But yeah, to go back to that original question, my intent is to really make obvious things that we emphasize and talk about. So like knees flexed, gastrocnemius gets put on slack. If it's slacking, someone else in the group, hey, you ever have well, first of all, I have to ask you, we've all had this. You ever, I know you have had some type of group project, whether it's a junior high, high school, college, and everybody in the group got the same grade, and somebody slacked. And so somebody else in the group's got to take up that slack. We got to do more work. It might piss you off. It should piss you off. It's the same concept. If the gastrocnemius is slacking, somebody's got to take up that slack to get that project done. In this case, the plantar flexor exercise. It's the same concept. Somebody's slacking, somebody's got to take up that slack. Cheat code that Dr. George used to say. Did I tell you all about Dr. George? Dr. George passed away in January. He was the professor teaching what I teach here since the 70s. The reason I'm saying that is George was teaching what I'm teaching before I was born. And we have had the same lineage. I have my own style, but a lot of what I do is based off of his inspiration. So we have had one continuous line of lineage since the 70s. All the students that have come by have had a little piece of George and myself since 1975. That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. But he used to say, longer is stronger. It rhymes and it sounds good. Specifically, though, we're talking about the rubber band-like properties, because, with the sarcomeres, if you get shorter. But the rubber band-like properties, the more you stretch it, the more it's going to return to its original state, building up stored elastic potential energy. And so that's how he explained it, which I think makes sense. Longer is stronger. And so if you slack it in one end, it's just not going to pull as out on the other, because we've taken that rubber band and we've slacked it here. So therefore the stretchy stuff ain't going to pull as much on this. Do this, it's going to pull more of it. What if I asked a question like this? First of all, you give me a muscle that you're pretty comfortable with. It can be a common muscle in our body, but just give me one that is gluteus maximus. Outstanding. Gluteus maximus. If I asked, the gluteus maximus is a hip extensor when it's working eccentrically. When working through eccentric contraction, the gluteus maximus is a hip extensor. Is that a true statement or a false statement? Very true, because it's always a hip extensor. It might be responsible for flexion, but it's still pulling in extension. So you think about like a straight leg raise, right? The gluteus maximus, when it's working eccentrically, it's still pulling this way. Think of it like this. If we flipped function based off of motion, then anything can be everything. Bless you. Meaning, if I said, well, if the gluteus maximus is working eccentrically and it's doing hip flexion, well, then the gluteus maximus is a hip flexor. But when it's working concentrically, it's a hip extensor. Well, then everything could be everything. The bicep could be an extensor. That doesn't make sense. It'd be more confusing. Its purpose is its pull. The purpose is in the pull. The pull is the purpose. So the gluteus maximus is a hip extensor, whether it's at rest, whether it's working concentrically, whether it's working isometrically, whether it's working eccentrically. I mean, think about it. In isometrics, there is no motion. 2 out of 3 times, I've said this in the past, but to me it's so important. If we go to the old Googler and we said, I'm going to say action, but y'all know I don't like that word. Look at that. This is growth. This is growth. This is you looking back on a past version of yourself and saying, this means something different to me now. That's how you know you've been growing as a kinesiology professional. Why do we have a problem with what Google says the gluteus maximus does? I
Don't know the extent that's still like.
The gluteus maximus, ironically enough, we have 3 options for contraction, right? Isocon. It only does that 1 out of 3. Isn't that 333 when it actually is doing that? Isometrically, there's going to be no motion at all. And eccentrically, you're going to see motion. So the problem with this caveman-like verbiage is it makes us associate specific muscles with specific motion. Hip flexors do hip flexion. Oh, extension must be the extension. It totally loses the concept of eccentricity. The gluteus maximus is a hip extension puller. Oh, that's all I'm doing. I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm adding context. The gluteus maximus is a hip extension puller. The gluteus maximus is a hip extensor, meaning it pulls in the direction of extension. But I'll darn if I'm going to say that gluteus maximus extends the hip. If I do, I have to give the context of contraction. The gluteus maximus does extend the hip when it's working concentrically, and only when it's working concentrically. And the Lord said, feel sometimes I'm preaching, but I'm passionate about it. And what you guys don't see, unless I tell you, you don't know what you don't know, is the hours and hours and hours I've spent with students over the past 20 years. And this has been the biggest hang up. I've evolved because as I learn from students, I see where the dents are. I see where the divots are. I see the consistencies in the misunderstandings. And that's where I go all in. Guys, you don't need me to memorize a bunch of pictures of muscles. You don't need me for that. But you might need me to make some sense of it all. How do you play? You know, you can read every wrestling book, techniques, strategies. You can read every chess book about every chess player. But the only way to get better at wrestling, chess, softball, gymnastics, track and field, is to play. It's to wrestle. Is to get your butt whooped. Now, what I try to do is I try to whoop your butt metaphorically when it doesn't count. In class, doing these kind of more complicated questions and preparing you for game day. When you're like, all right, I'm prepared for this. He's going to come at me with this because he told me he's going to come at me with this, and I'm going to be ready for it. That's when it counts. I play poker with my cards out. I'm telling you not only what I'm going to ask, but I'm also explaining why people traditionally miss it. All right, enough about that. What else y'all want to talk about? Like you've given your motivation speech, we're ready to go tackle the world. It's important. Guys, there are still some people. I do this, I call it an old man circuit. But at my age and with my knees and my hip, I can't do traditional exercise. And I showed my wife, I was like, babe, check this out. And the girl was doing the little exercise. And she said, all right, now we're going to work bicep. And her partner correctly was like, tricep. She's like, oh yeah, tricep. And the reason she said bicep was because her first motion was flexion. And so her brain was like, oh, bicep does flexion. Till it doesn't. So that's why we have these processes. What's gravity trying to do? Who do I not need? Who do I need? Extensors working eccentrically, extensors working concentrically. You can use your bicep and your other flexors, but you have to go faster than what gravity can offer. You'd be swimming downstream. But we can't assume just because there was flexion, there's this muscle that did it. It's not how it works. That happens all the time. There's questions, and it's not students' fault. I just don't think you've ever been introduced to it. There's students that will tell me that they're working tricep when you go down and bicep when you come up. And I'm like, you know that's not true. Because when you go do that exercise, you do not turn on your tricep when you're doing curls. You know it's not true, but your brain is still going to tell me something that your body knows isn't true, because that's how hard it is to not want to associate a specific muscle with a specific motion. Do you feel me? You feel what I'm trying to say? It's so easy to say, oh, extension must be tricep. Heck, that's what Google says. So that's why we just have to take a deep breath, slow down. What's gravity trying to do? Trying to extend me. I don't need my tricep. I don't need my extensors. So how can the same muscles do different motions, different contractions? That's literally the essence of what I'm trying to teach you. But it's more than just, we've got to practice. We've got to play. We've got to play. We've got to keep playing. We got to go up against left-handers that take us to the baseline and be like, oh gosh, I thought they were going to go to the right, but they went to the left. I'm going to be ready for them next time when they try to go to my left. Did I tell you the story? That's why I dominated in basketball in my small little town when I was a kid, because I was the only left-hander. Everybody's assuming you're going to go to the right. And then that door got shut once everybody wasn't expecting to go to left. I'm like, oh gosh, I'm not going to do. We've got to be prepared. Let me ask you this. How much time we have? One-legged wrestler. You remember that guy? The one-legged wrestler? Was that? Yeah. Did he have an advantage or a disadvantage having one leg? It was an advantage. Huge advantage. Huge advantage. That doesn't take away from his ability to win the championship, but in wrestling, notice, he wasn't a sprinter. Wrestling. Why do you think that is? Because in wrestling, you wrestle in weight classes, right? This person got to take the mass of an entire leg and redistribute it other places in his body. It's like, and then on top of that, and this is what I'm trying to get at, he got to practice against two-legged wrestlers every day. Not everybody he went against in the tournament could practice against one-legged. Think about that for a second. The only chance you got to practice against this person was when you faced him in competition. So you're going to reach for something that's not there. You're going up against someone who has much more upper body strength than you because they can redistribute that mass into their upper body. Now, I have no problem with it because that's like saying, well, Shaq shouldn't be able to play basketball because he's tall. But there are certain advantages that may not be obvious, that you only know about when you play. So play kinesiology, play muscles, go in the weight room and play. And don't just do the exercises because you do them with a kinesiology mindset. All right, I'm doing this exercise. What's the machine trying to do to me? What's the barbell trying to do to me? Do it for just the muscles you're accountable for. What's gravity trying to do to me? What do I need to use? When I see that motion, what type of contraction? When I see the other motion, that type of contraction, right? And I'm giving the wrestler example because you guys are wrestlers, and it's stuff we don't really think about. Like, wow, there could be an advantage with that in wrestling. It's pretty cool. Really, really cool. I cannot believe, what did Abel Stevenson lost that, did y'all see that? You think he got soft? Like, because he went to the WWF for a while? No? You think that dude just got lucky? Yeah. Because you know how, like, it's hard to stay at the top? So I was like, he's won the gold, he's accomplished everything. But that's not my world, so I don't know what he does. Oh yeah, I'll follow all kinds of stuff. I'm in a wrestling fantasy league. All right, nothing else? All right, guys, I hope this pep talk was good. Got it. Was that kid was like an Air Force graduate, huh?